This is a disease unique to Hinamizawa. I'm not sure what it's officially called, but I've always known it as Hinamizawa Syndrome. Everyone glanced back and forth at each other when I mentioned the term. They'd never heard of it before. You know, that's very interesting when you think about it. Because Satoko is obviously being treated at the Irie clinic for an unknown disease, and it seems like, you know, it fits the Hinamizawa syndrome. That probably is what it is. But Satoko knows nothing about it. I think Rika even pretty much pointed out that she has that. I think Irie did as well at one point. But what also is surprising, really, is that Mion knows nothing about this. She's the next in line to be the heir of the Sonozaki family, and even they don't know about the research of the Hinamizawa syndrome. They've got all this influence, but that's one thing they don't know. The name Hinamizawa Syndrome has actually been around since before the war. It's a general term for the severe homesickness and mental instability that people from Hinamizawa experience when outside of the village. Yeah, it's been a long time, you know, since we've actually gotten that specific information. That, you know... I mean, I think they've referenced that before, haven't they? I think it might have even been... I think it was in the Watanagashi and Meakashi arcs. I think when, like, Mion, who was really Shion at the time, explained, like, the history of the village and all that. But obviously they didn't know about the Hinamizawa Syndrome. But this is, like, an important plot point. People in Hinamizawa refused to leave the village in Sierra of Onikafuchi. Villagers believed that they'd be cursed by Shirasama if they left, and people who did often came back because of that curse. In general, it used to be thought of as only severe homesickness, but during the war, soldiers from Hinamizawa became mentally deranged in faraway places. That does sometimes happen in war. What was unique about the soldiers from Hinamizawa was the way that they killed their own comrades and committed suicide at the end. One doctor became curious about these cases and studied those soldiers. That's when they found out that it was actually a disease only found in Hinamizawa. According to this doctor, their strange behavior was not the result of their culture, it was a mental disease triggered by external circumstances. A mental disease with an external cause is different from a psychological illness. It's the result of some kind of physical disorder, and it causes people to become mentally unstable when something triggers it. There are 3 categories of internally caused mental diseases: traumatically induced, substance abuse induced, and chemical imbalance induced. Traumatically induced disorders are cases resulting from damage to the brain from trauma or infection that influences the mind. This is the reason personalities can change as a result of head injuries. Substance abuse, as the name suggests, refers to cases where drugs, especially alcohol or stimulants, have influenced the mind. The last category is chemical imbalances. These are cases where some elements in the patient's body causes abnormal secretions of bodily chemicals which then influence the brain's functions. This may sound odd, but it's been said that people tend to become depressed when they have a cold. We've all experienced the ways in which physical sickness can cause a build-up of negative emotions. However, with chemical imbalances, the cause is more direct. People's emotions aren't born from our hearts. Everyone should know, logically, that they're the results of chemicals secreted by the organs in our body as necessary. So when the organs operating the secretion of those emotional controllers malfunction, it causes them to secrete abnormal amounts. The thyroid gland, for example, secretes hormones that regulate emotions. When that gland is defective, the balance of those hormones become unstable. This can cause people to have not only a physical sickness, but also a mental sickness such as depression. People don't get mentally ill just because of mental problems. Human beings are made out of meat. They get mentally ill when that meat is defective. The doctor studying Hinamizawa Syndrome also came up with a theory. He suggested that there's a pathogen endemic to Hinamizawa that, if it so strays too far from home, affects the chemicals in their brain and causes them to hallucinate. I mean, that's a really oddly specific kind of syndrome, isn't it? Just like, okay, they leave their village and suddenly, like, that kicks in. It seems a bit odd, isn't it? Well, more than a bit odd, really. Villagers' belief in Oyashiro-sama is certainly related to this endemic disease. People in Onigarafuchi village knew about this syndrome. They knew that they couldn't survive outside the village. They also didn't want anyone else to enter the village because they would get infected too. They took this disease as a curse, not a sickness. The most significant symptoms of this disease are antisocial behavior and an extreme resection complex. Eventual suicide caused by defects in the lymph nodes are also another unique characteristic. Here, another thing with that is it also seems to lead to a great sense of paranoia, and the antisocial behavior is very obvious as well. We've seen the effects of it. It's obvious now. You look back at the series and how characters just kind of lost entirely. You're starting to see it in a different light here now that we know about this thing here. So it's those symptoms do match up with that. The unusual behavior of terminal patients is what inspired the legend of the demons coming out of the swamp and attacking the villagers. Basically, sick villagers develop severe execution complexes and wound up killing other villagers. Did I read all the previous bit? No, wrong. The goes about the effects of lymph nodes are also another unique characteristic. After a long time, survivors of the disease started to comprehend its rules. They discovered that the disease is incurable once you contract it. That's why they started barring outsiders from entering the village. Also, once you become ill, you will begin developing a persecution complex. This can happen to anyone in the village. The doctrine of Oyashiro-sama says that the blood of humans and demons was mixed together, and that Oyashiro-sama has control over the violent blood of the demons. People said that you'd be cursed if you didn't follow Oyashiro-sama's rules. That could also be understood to mean that as long as you followed Oyashiro-sama's rules, you could cope with this endemic disease. This is what was meant by the scripture in Oyashiro-sama's legend that said they'd appear unified, the humans and demons, and made them live together in this village. Then there was the most important part, the rules to prevent symptoms from appearing. Those rules are the taboos, and people were strictly taught that Oyashiro-sama would curse them if they broke those rules. The horrible bloody traditions of the village were probably performed in order to force people to respect these taboos. There are several ways to keep the disease under control, but there are two main conditions for doing so. You know what I find interesting as well is, now that we know Hanyu is, basically Oyashiro-sama and all that from this arc, and we heard her thoughts on all of these past things that happened in the past. Must go back at least a couple of 100 years, this whole thing. So if that's the case, then the epidemic thing, the disease, the Hinamizawa Syndrome, probably predates the world wars, probably. So it's been there longer, but that's probably when it first started to make people take note of it and be hey, there's something interesting here. First one is to prevent suspicion. When the villagers are suspicious of someone, it can trigger their persecution complex, which can lead to them developing terminal symptoms. That's why they made sure to have such a tightly knit community so that people wouldn't suspect each other. And that makes a lot of sense as well, because when you think about it, any time a character that goes off the deep end and goes completely insane, that's what first starts to trigger it, isn't it? It's suspicions of other people. And once they start to get suspicious and paranoid, then they just go more and more off the deep end. Since the terror of Oyashiro-sama's curse is emphasized, many don't know this, but she's also a god of marriage and neighborly love. However, this condition is not as important as the other one. Indeed, Oyashiro-sama isn't even recognized as a god of friendship in Hinamizawa anymore, and is only worshipped as such in Okima's Hirosaka district. Now for the other condition. This one is much clearer, and was practiced more strictly. Villagers leave Hinamizawa, they will fall ill quickly. proportional to the distance from the village. Villagers nowadays will not get sick as rapidly, even if they leave town or even go out of the country for a long time. However long ago, they would fall ill as soon as they left the village. It's very unfortunate that Keiichi got infected so soon after he moved to the village. It was also very unfortunate that he got sick just because he left the village for a few days to go to his relative's funeral in that one world. Yeah, that was the Onikakushi. Remember that one? It's just like, I want to talk about the intro of that one a bit more, but it's not like it feels like I gotta wait a little bit longer before I can talk about that, because it's quite interesting in retrospect. But yeah, him leaving obviously when he came back from that obviously kind of set it in motion. So he was already developing symptoms of it a bit. And, stumbling upon the things he did just increased it. That's why Hanyu felt so bad for him that time and kept on apologizing over and over. Right there! Although no matter how much he apologized, he never heard a voice. And that right there, now I can talk about it. Because in the Onikakushi arc, he had that paranoia that he could feel someone there. And he was like, who's there? And all that. But no one was there. He could tell that Hanyu was there, but not fully. He couldn't see her or anything, but he could sense her. And it freaked him the fuck out. And in the intro, when he was on the way back, he could hear someone apologizing repeatedly. That was obviously must have been Hanyu, because Hanyu must have known what was going to happen, because Keiichi left the village, and when he returns, he's gonna have the syndrome. So she was apologizing repeatedly, and unintentionally kind of drove him a bit further over the edge. This turned into a long discussion, but these rules etched around Oyashiro-sama's curse represent the ancient wisdom of how to cope with the Hinamizawa Syndrome. And it's interesting when you look back at it in retrospect with this information, isn't it? Because they were sowing the seeds for it since the very beginning, it seems. Although, at the same time, you've got to wonder, did they have Hanyu's character, already in mind right from the get-go? I mean, that is a possibility. Or did they, just add it further on as they went? Is there any way to use this mental disease for military purposes? The aforementioned doctor insisted there was, but the military didn't listen to him at all at the time. They were interested in developing a weapon that could make a dramatic change to the war efforts. They didn't have any money to spare for the research of this strange disease. In this way, research on Hinamizawa Syndrome was abandoned. Then the war ended. Japan started its reconstruction under American leadership. However, some powerful people in the political world didn't want to accept the American way of thinking. Some of them were fired by the GHQ, but they still stayed on as advisors to the government, since Japan has a culture respecting the elderly. Eventually, a political organization was formed, the object of which was to restore Japan to the way it was before the war. In the beginning, this organization was a very small group. It was just a gathering of 2 or 3 individuals who shared the same ideals, blowing hot air at a restaurant. Those 2 or 3 hit it off with each other and grew to the size of a class reunion. That group became a rather sizable organization, eventually becoming a political one. Well, it would be more accurate to call them a secret society. This secret society eventually came to be called by the name of the place where it was based, Tokyo. There are many mysteries about Tokyo. One thing I knew for sure is that it was composed of old men from Japan's political stage, ones with strong power to indirectly influence the government and vast assets that meant they could work from the shadows. They were also connected to various corporations, and their goal was to return Japan to the way it was before the war. Of course, that was a pretty ridiculous goal. It was nothing more than an idea in their minds immediately after the war, back when they were still bowing their heads to the occupation forces of those white barbarians. Is that actually the wording? That's a bit racist. Yeah, isn't it? Let me just check the dictionary again. Now, let's see the kanji character for white in there. How about barbarians? I don't think we're gonna find that in here, though. Yep. Could be in the Japanese section, but I'm not even gonna bother checking because it just would be kind of pointless. Once Japan's post-war reconstruction began, Tokyo steadily became a shell of its former self. But it didn't certainly become a shell, it culled the fat. Japan regained its peace, and years passed. However, some people still continue to believe that Japan had been better before the war, and they were determined to return the country to those times. And what kind of times would that be, exactly? So this Tokyo plotted how to restore pre-war Japan from many angles. He approached the problem economically, internationally, and militarily as well. Japan has no nuclear armaments due to the free and non-nuclear principles. In other words, this country has to brown-nose America as long as they hold nuclear weapons. Number one priority of Tokyo is to be independent from America. They want this country to be on equal footing, and to obtain a weapon of mass destruction that is nuclear in nature. How weird is that? It's just like, no, we must have a weapon that's really powerful to show the other nations that we mean business. And you don't want to fuck with us. I mean, nowadays, Japan has, come a long way since then. Very technologically advanced. That was the reason why they started thinking about utilizing Hinamizawa Syndrome. Okay, it all comes back to that then. I mean, that would be a very deadly one, that would be. However, they couldn't study this disease openly. In order to utilize it for military purposes, they had to hide the existence of the disease itself. I mean, nuclear weapons, that's bad, real bad. But a biological weapon like this as well is also very, very bad. So they enlisted one young researcher, Kyosuke Irie. Did I read the baseline? Utilize it for military attack. Yeah. I need to make it clear that Irie isn't some far-right supporter of this secret society. He's just a young, capable doctor and an earnest researcher. He published an innovative thesis, but other academics thought he was too radical. However, that convinced Tokyo that he was the only researcher suitable to study Hinamizawa Syndrome. As someone young and ambitious, Irie was thrilled to take on the project of studying this rare disease with a large budget, a large staff, and his own facility. But research on the disease would mean that he'd end up infected too. No one would want to take on such dangerous research. He really was too young. With his other option being wearing down his youth working hard at the night shift for a local practice, he wanted to answer the expectations of the sponsor who carefully selected him. In the end, Irie was able to uncover that, as hypothesized, Hinamizawa Syndrome was a unique infectious disease and he developed both a treatment and a vaccine. Irie was extremely talented. The Irie Institute was formed to study the disease. Irie was nominally the head of the organization. Nominally. But Tokyo still sent out a supervisor, because when all was said and done, he was just a researcher. That supervisor was Mio Takano. Takano's job at the Institute was to act as a go-between for Tokyo and Irie, manage the research progress and preserve its secrecy. The latter was the most important part of her job. She had to do her best to prevent people from finding out that Irie was researching the disease, or even that the disease exists at all. The mountain dogs were formed for that purpose. They were under Takano's command, and their job is to prevent the Institute's secrets from being discovered. The Commanding Dogs are one special forces unit specializing in unconventional warfare and owned by Tokyo with its vast influence on the SDF. Tokyo had set their eyes on the likelihood that a small elite squad of covert operatives would be a trump card in the anti-nuke era, so they vigorously investigated those options. This was a worldwide trend. Since the Cold War, everyone avoided sending troops directly to their enemy's doorstep. Japan was also trying to be part of that world. As a result, by 1983, even the police have been forming secret special forces units. Virtual Police Squad 2, the ones who intervened when Rena laid siege to a school, changed their name to Zero Company and grew into an anti-terrorism squad that handled hijackings around the Kansai airport area. National Police Agency Squad 6 was formed as a counter-terrorism squad for Narita Airport 2, and they later changed name to 7th Company as well. That's interesting that I was involved in Rena's case back when because she left the village as well with her parents. Everything was fine for a long time, but then something, probably because of it was probably the stress of what was going on that triggered the thing with Rena, which caused her to flip out, and I guess they got involved in that. The question is, how does freaking Rika know about that? I mean, I guess she has lived 100 years or so she probably at least heard it from Rena at some point in one of those. Either from Rena herself or from Oishi or something, you know? They realized that in a world where nations possess nukes they can't use, small elite special forces disrupting metropolitan areas would be the new way of waging war. So in 1977 they developed SAT's predecessor, the Special Task Force SAP, to serve as the National Police Agency's trump card in securing the peace. Likewise, the Japan Coast Guard established their Special Task Force, the SST, in anticipation of unconventional warfare on the coast. There are several known special forces units in Japan. It's the interesting thing when you think about it. Nuclear weapons have kind of prevented, full-scale wars because of how everyone loses in that scenario. Nobody wins. So what's even the point? But it doesn't stop war entirely. It's just that's just human nature, it seems. It's just no, we gotta fight against each other, but we can't go all out because then we'd all be fucked. So we gotta do it on a smaller scale and shit like that. It's just no, we can't obtain peace because there's always got to be war, isn't there? When they hear a phrase like special forces, most people tend to think of a movie or a comic book. However, these units actually exist and are protecting Japan in secret. During the famous instance of suspicious boats off the coast of Nato, Venezuela, the news reported that the boat sank before the helicopter squad trained in gun battles, so the squad was recalled. But that was because the Coast Guard's SST acted. However, the news never mentioned the SST or any other special forces unit. All of these units were established after Tokyo made a suggestion about it to the government. Researching military tactics under the name of peace and order worked perfectly for Tokyo. But since the mid-century, anti-war movement made people resent those forces. Their special units have been kept secret as of 1983. Furthermore, these units are not all formed under the jurisdiction of the police. There are still many other military units that are kept secret from the average citizen. The Commanding Dogs are actually one of those special units. They specialize in kidnapping, espionage, and preserving secrecy. Might as well call them an assassination unit. They were around during the dam conflict as well. Well, this should be interesting. Tokyo worked to put an end to the dam project because of the impact it would have on Irie's research. The Commanding Dogs were the ones who kidnapped the Minister of Construction's grandson. So it was them that did that then. Most people believe that the Sonozaki family was at the center of the movement, but in reality the Mountain Dogs were responsible for many of the things the Sonozaki family Sonozakis were accused of. In that sense, the existence of the Sonozaki family was an advantage to the dogs. If you remember the fourth question arc, Akasaka and Oishi encountered that incident with the grandson of whoever it was. Their main job after the dam conflict ended has been to continue keeping the disease hidden from the public. With the spread of information networks in the modern age, the media jumped onto any unusual incident and quickly aired it to the whole nation. You know what? Can you imagine if Higurashi took place in more modern times, rather than the early mid-80s? It'd just be like it'd be even more widespread with that, wouldn't it? With the internet. Tokyo doesn't want the disease to be known nationwide since they're trying to utilize it for their own purposes. Of course, then you'd be like, no man, it's just a conspiracy. Or maybe the ones with the conspiracies would be the ones like, I told you man, I was right. That was Hinamizawa Syndrome thing, it's right there. You were all blind, you didn't believe us, but now you have no choice. The main task of the mountain dogs is to kidnap people suffering from Hinamizawa Syndrome. They pose as gardeners, but in actuality they patrol the village to make sure nothing strange happens. I mean, like I said earlier, there was one arc, I forget which one it was, but they did, show up at the school at one point there, under the guise of these so-called gardeners. And I can't remember which, it might have actually been the previous arc, I think it was. So, yeah, and Rena was suspicious of them. I mean, she was already getting overly paranoid. But in a way, she was kind of right to be suspicious of them, but not for the reason she was suspecting them, Because they are suspicious because they're the freaking mountain dogs, man. They're the ones behind this shit. Or at least they're a part of it. They're the ones who demon away people who go missing. They're probably also involved in some of the mysterious deaths too. The last important person is Jiro Tomitake. I don't know his real name, so I guess he's... I mean, it would make sense, really, wouldn't it? He, obviously works for the government, and a very important role he's got, so he'd obviously use an alias. He was an auditor who was sent from Tokyo 4 times a year. He aimed to check on the progress of research and outlined requests from Tokyo. He discussed the research budget with Irie too. He also got the observation report on Irie from Takano. That was his purpose. Irie started out by studying the autopsy results of dead villagers, and he discovered many answers from that. In 1979, the mountain dogs kidnapped the culprit behind the murder of the construction chief, who was a terminal patient of Hinamizawa Syndrome. The nature of the disease was dramatically clarified. Now this, right here, it's kind of been forgotten and kicked to the side since the Onikakushi arc, because the main trigger for the Onikakushi arc, where Keiichi starts to get paranoid, is uncovering the incident of the dam conflict. Like in all the other arcs, it's referenced, but it doesn't go into details. It's like a kind of yeah, that's interesting, yeah. It's like, yeah, we fought back against our bosses and all that, but they don't mention the dam foreman murder, Or if they do, they don't do it in quite the same way as Keiichi found out about it, which led to a lot of paranoia. So now, we're seeing, finally, what happens to the main culprits that killed the guy. Their research made rapid progress after that, and they discovered a vaccine, medication, and other methods of treatment for the disease. At the same time, they continue to investigate how to utilize it for military purposes. One of the interesting findings of the research was that the pathogen can only be found within the patient when the patient is still alive. On top of that, they couldn't detect the presence of the pathogens at all unless they use a certain inhumane methods. In other words, it's virtually impossible to detect the pathogen by normal means. It left almost no trace, and the unusual symptoms it produced seemed like voluntary behavior, so they concluded that the disease could be used to their advantage. However, Tokyo had been going through some changes. So from that, it sounds like the mountain dogs took the main guy behind because if I recall from the Onikakushi arc, or one of the other arcs, it was revealed that the people who killed the guy, like, because they, like, if I recall, like, each severed a limb, and, like, that was their way of being like, now, you take this, bury it somewhere, or whatever the hell, I can't even remember, just like so that every one of them, none of them would turn themselves in or anything. If I recall, all of them did eventually turn themselves in, but there was this one person who didn't, and there was one missing limb as a result. So, from here, we learned that the mountain dogs had taken that guy, and he must have been researched at the Irie clinic for the Hinamizawa Syndrome under inhumane circumstances, conditions. That kind of solves that long mystery of it, doesn't it? It's been almost 50 years since the war ended. The leaders in shadows behind Japan's government, who ruled from the center of Tokyo, began growing in vermin, opening up seats, steadily passing their leadership to the new generation. The whole organization has started to shift. Of course, the purpose of Tokyo has stayed the same. Still a secret society of ultra-nationalists who want Japan to be at the top of the world. So they want to rule! Wherever their ambition to start a war with America and take over the world is diminished. I don't think that'd be wise. You know, really, try to rule over the entire world. No country could achieve that. I don't think that'd be possible. Tokyo has directed its priorities towards the economy, international affairs, and education. You know, I remember, I think it was a YouTube video, or something, I can't remember. I think it was about the geography of Japan, and like, how it's not exactly got the most land for, you know, fertilizing crops and shit like that. And I'm not sure if it was like, kind of theorized that maybe that's, or maybe it was even, a reason why Japan would kind of invade other countries in the surrounding area, because they'd have more, you know, resources. Doesn't mean that those ambitions are gone entirely out there. But you know, nowadays, the world's a bit more, you know, connected. You can get sources from pretty much anywhere that you like, kind of like, you know, not on bad terms with, you know, have an agreement with, like, the, you know, shipping, like, specific stuff and all that. Be like, okay, we'll get fruits and vegetables from you. You can bring them in. You can bring in sources of meat and all that, blah, 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 you know? Instead of having to rely entirely on what crops your country can, you know, grow and shit. Civilization is still alive, retain those ambitions. Tokyo continues to finance military research. But for the present day Tokyo, Irie's research is actually something of an embarrassment. Tokyo is no longer interested in his project, but they announced that they're going to cut their budget as soon as those seniors pass away. However, Irie objected to that plan. Strongly appealed for the continuation of his research. This is what Okanagi was talking about. Irie is in disagreement with Tokyo. You know, this is a long, given all the details here. It's just like, so is Rika explaining all of this, these exact details? Well, maybe not all the exact ones, because there's like those bits where it's like, oh yeah, and you know, that's what led to Keiichi going a bit completely insane in one of the previous worlds. She obviously doesn't say like that probably, but she's explaining all this shit to them. Irie's research has been making great progress. They've discovered various treatments and testing methods, and he's even starting to develop a treatment plan for the whole village. If they cut its funding, Irie's research would end without any results. Tokyo had a discussion with Irie through Tomitake, and they decided to shut down his research partially, but not fully. However, they told him to immediately stop researching military applications of the disease, and destroy all research that related to that. He had little interest in weaponizing the disease anyway, so Irie accepted those terms right away. Tokyo probably believed that it was better to let him find a cure for the disease than to terminate the project entirely. At this point, Irie considers himself one of the villagers. Perhaps exterminating the disease-infected villagers without their knowledge is his way of atoning for using the village to advance his research and reputation. Both Tokyo and Irie agreed to fully terminate his research as soon as he discovered a way to completely eradicate Hinamizawa Syndrome. Irie made a plan for the next 3 years, and he promised that he would find a resolution by 1986 at the latest. The meeting they had this June was to discuss the plan and budget for the next 3 years. Which brings us back to the beginning. Our theory goes that Irie is in opposition with Tokyo, and as his trump card, he's planned to kill Rika. The other theory is that Takano killed Tomitake, and as her trump card, she's going to kill Rika. This would all be so much more intriguing if there wasn't already revealed who's actually out to kill her, like. I suppose I need to explain why Rika can be a trump card. The answer to that lies in the ancient traditions of Hinamizawa. Supposedly, members of the Friday family have the blood of Oyashiro-sama in their veins. I explained earlier that Oyashiro-sama was made up as a method of having people cope with the disease. However, though, that's actually not true. For the demons of pathogens to survive, a certain being must be present. That being is the successor of the Friday family line. The truth behind the advent of Oyashiro-sama and the coexistence of humans and demons is that Oyashiro-sama was actually the queen of the village. According to Irie's research, Rika is adored by the whole village not only because she's a charming little girl, but because she's the queen carrier. Infected patients are unconsciously driven to protect their queen. Irie says that this is done with pheromones. So in a way, Rika is like a queen bee. Rika Fride's mother was also adored by everyone since she was little. However, as soon as she gave birth, people's attention quickly shifted to Rika. She's like, oh, you're not interested anymore. Irie calls it the succession of the throne. The queen is a precious existence to people in this village. There are theories that carriers of the disease are actually unable to survive when away from the queen, not from the village itself. Irie's research indicates that the queen can only survive in Hinamizawa, and infected patients can only stay alive when they're around her. But this is just a theory. Surprisingly, however, the doctor who first discovered the syndrome was also aware of the existence of the queen. That doctor was also knowledgeable about Hinamizawa's culture, and he was interested in how much value the village placed on the Friday family. He theorized that the queen lying in the Friday bloodline might have the power to manipulate the whole village. Truth is still unknown, but perhaps the Friday family really has such power since ancient times, miraculous power that would make them perfect for serving in the priesthood. Although the only thing Rika can do is to be doted upon by the villagers. If all this is true, then the question is, what would happen if the queen disappeared from the village? During the war, Dr. prophesied that if the queen were to die, then all the infected would show terminal symptoms. The whole village would be wiped out. He advocated for strict preservation of the queen's host. Rika is important to Tokyo not only because Irie found many answers after running tests on her body. If Rika Friday dies, the 2,000 people in Hinamizawa will turn into demons. It would happen too fast for people to even realize that they are getting sick. They will each be overcome with a violent persecution complex and start killing each other out of fear. This is why the bandit dogs are protecting the queen, Rika Friday. Her death spells the end of the whole village. That's why Rika Friday is a trump card for those who know that she's the carrier of the whole village. Wait, the whole, I think I said the wrong word there. Nope. Oh, wait, no, yeah, epidemic. This is the story of Hinamizawa. Our tale begins in June 1983. Tokyo's son Tomitake was found dead of the disease, even though he was vaccinated against it. On the same night, Takano was also kidnapped and murdered, though I don't know for sure if she's really dead or not. Rika Friday is also going to be murdered soon enough. While I suspected Irie and Takano, this was my first time doubting Tokyo. I always thought that they were on my side. They had to be. My death would lead to nothing but disaster. At the same time, there might be people within Tokyo who could use my death as a trump card. I never considered that there were opposing factions within Tokyo. I guess I was naive enough to not realize that Tokyo had internal problems due to the generation gap. Anyway, I wouldn't be feeling this way if I didn't suspect that Takano might still be alive. I feel like I'm starting to see the greater picture. It's possible too that Takano is the victim and Irie is the bad guy. Bandit dogs might be on my side, or they might be assassins who are trying to kill me. I was too scared to choose a wine that might be at risk of having something poisonous mixed in which case I could rest assured with a fresh, unopened bottle, even if it was a little bad. After telling everything to my friends, I finally realized that I could only trust them and the police. I'm really dumb. I thought I was thinking so hard, but I never actually understood anything. After all this time, I made things clear just by talking about them with my friends. I never thought it would make such a big difference. Meep. And that's the end of my story. And that's the end of this record session. How will Rika's friends, everyone react to all that? That big amount of information right there. Find out next time. So see you next time, viewers. See you next time.